Hello, Samson here. So, an interesting segment of book reviews. We've got 3 more months before the year ends. I've not been so consistent, which is not a good thing. No excuse, regardless of how busy I am. But either way, we are back at it. Going to see to it that maybe throughout the rest of this quarter, we're going to get some book reviews done. I was reading an interesting book by Dumisani, Africa Must Think. The conference was recent on Sunday, and then today I got the book yesterday, read it yesterday, and then doing a book review today. It's a masterpiece. I must commend it. It's got a lot of insights, and indeed there is need for Africa to think. The book is divided into 3 parts. The first part is dealing with the radical mindset that we need to have. The second part is dealing with the problems that we are facing as Africans. And then the third part of the book is dealing with the path to progress that we're supposed to have. So in the prologue, starting out of the book, he's discussing the fact that in a land that is bursting with a lot of potential and a lot of resources, we often find ourselves playing out small for whatever reasons we have. We are going to see from the book that we need to have. Chapter 1 is the discussion under a radical mind shift. So there are 3 specific mindsets I think that he's noted, and which I think I agree with if we are to delve into them and look at the fact that Africa has to develop. The first mind said that he's discussing is a revering of the white man. So there is a lot of reverence given to the white man, praising him and whatnot for whatever they're doing and all that. So if we need to develop, then there is need to have that mind shift at the end of the day. The second mind said that he's discussing is the dependence on the government. It was okay, I think, during the time of our forefathers, where after they got independent and whatnot, independence from the colonial masters and all that, and then the discussions around, okay, the government is going to provide for all that, but the population has grown to an extent where not only the government is going to be able to serve us. So dependency on the government is not something that's going to help us at the end of the day. And then the third mindset that is basically prophesy, man of God. So religion has become something that is a function primarily of an emotional coping mechanism, as one author I think puts it. So the emotional coping mechanism of that is hindering the fact that we're supposed to look at life practically, as it's supposed to come back to reality and then be able to see progress. So we want instant blessings, want instant wealth, want instant riches. So this is like something that is affecting us. And then if we're to really get to develop, we need a mind shift from the 3 mindsets that we have as Africans. Chapter 2, he's discussing excuses expire. The fact that you were an orphan at 12 years, it's okay for you to complain up to a certain age, but when you reach a certain age, that excuse expires. So Japan as a case study, we have history, of course, of our colonial masters and slavery and everything that Africa went through. Japan, in a similar instance, I think, went through something that was devastating for their country, but they took it upon themselves in order for them to develop, where they put in economic reforms, they expanded their export market and everything, whatever they were producing. So it took them as a nation to think and then look at how best they could develop their country. And if Africa has to develop and grow, then there is need for us to really leave excuses behind, because you cannot have excuses and results at the same time. Les Brown says you can only have excuses and results, but bear in mind that excuses do not count. Chapter 3, we're discussing the fact that there is need to stop the blame game. So discussing the blame game, it's dealing with the negative work culture that we have as Africans. Mostly what happens is the fact that in most governmental institutions, I don't know if it's just in my country, but processes are very slow. You might go and you need to get something done, they'll tell you to come tomorrow. I remember I had an instance where I wanted to do my test certificate for the vehicle, went to Silverest, and they told me, no, the system is down. we don't know what time it's going to be restored. You can come back tomorrow. How frustrating that is. So there is need for us to work around the fact that we need to stop the blame game. So there is also need for us to look into the fact that we do not need to misuse our resources that we have. So evolution of developed countries, I think, has proven the fact that it's possible even for Africa to be able to develop only if we could collaborate and use resources as they're supposed to be used. Chapter 4, we're dealing with the fact that there is need to think big. Thinking big, the greatest takeaway I got is the fact that we need to collaborate and not only compete. Competition is good and got its own place, but then if we're to move forward as a continent and as a nation, then there is need for us to be able to collaborate. So there are 3 types of entrepreneurs who he's discussing in this specific section of the book. So the first one is dealing with the fact that they're survivalists. These are guys who are going to do basically everything in order for them to survive. So they just care about them because they need to survive at the end of the day. The second set he's discussing are the success-minded entrepreneurs. So these ones have got access to resources, to capital and everything, but they do whatever they are doing for their own personal gain and benefit. And then the last one, the societal minded entrepreneurs. So these ones basically have like a huge impact on society. They have personal gains and then they also help out the society develop. Part 2 is dealing with the problems that we have as Africans. And in chapter 5, we're dealing with our education system. So entrepreneurs, I love how Dumisani puts it, where he says these are national assets who are supposed to be nurtured. So education invested in entrepreneurship and skills and knowledge needed for us to thrive as entrepreneurs in the continent and as in the nation is going to enhance the fact that we are going to have an enterprising country which is going to be able to produce not only raw materials, but be able to add value to the raw materials that we've produced and be able to export, which is going to bring in foreign exchange. There is need for us to rethink our curriculum. Why are we still learning about grasshoppers, regardless of them having a place wherever in society and whatnot for general knowledge and all that, but I do not think it's something that's very necessary for us to be able to. But I think the point is made there. There is need to rethink our curriculum, and then there is need to cultivate an ecosystem where we're going to be able to support entrepreneurship, and then there is like a thriving ecosystem for entrepreneurship, for entrepreneurs to grow. There is also need to foster practical experiences, so internships, apprenticeships and whatnot, mentorships and all that, which are needed for students and then different people just to be able to thrive in whatever they doing. Even after university, they should be able to have practical experience and knowledge of the industries that they need to delve in. So we need to also adapt context-based learning. So if Zambia is a mining country, Zambia is an agricultural nation, in different parts of Zambia, let's have context-based learning where we're training youngsters, children and all that to be able to understand whatever is going on in mining, manufacturing, in agriculture and all that. A problem which is mostly common is access to capital, as we talk about SMEs and all that. So access to capital has been something that is somewhat controversial and all that. Starting a business, Dumisani says, you do not necessarily need money, although it's got its own place if you want to scale and all that, but then there is need to rethink how our access to capital comes through. So 40% of SMEs struggle with the fact that investors or financiers look at them as high risk for them to invest in, and reasons are quite valid. So some of the reasons are them being not investor ready, not knowing even the basic things that they need for them to run their businesses. But then we need to rethink the way we look at our access to capital. Then we need to embrace resourcefulness. So resources which we have, people, time, and different types of resources which we could basically transform into something that can be workable for us, and there is need to build a strong foundation. We're talking about relationships, that we need to build a relationship between us and our mentors in order for us to be able to thrive in whatever we are doing. And then there is need to leverage alternative funding options, microfinance, crowdfunding, government grants, and all those. So there is also need to be investor ready, and by doing so we should be able, I think, to overcome the access to capital crisis that's there. So the other problem is chapter 7, discussing beyond the African dream. Let me get a car, let me get a good house, and then let me have a steady job and a steady income that's coming in. I think if we are to really develop, there is need for us to be able to think beyond just survival and just the luxury that comes with, okay, I've got a job and I've got what, because real success has to be determined, I think, on a global scale where we're able to have a lot of impact. So there is need to break that mental ceiling. I love how athletes in Zambia are doing it, or athletes in Africa basically, where they're able to put us on the world map, and then we're able to say, okay, we can break through this ceiling and then be able to do exploits. So Africa has a lot to do in that space. Chapter 8, we're dealing with the cry of our beloved minerals. It's sad that in Zambia or Africa, basically, we produce the raw materials that are used in developed countries, and then we just give them out raw, which are not value added, and then we get to buy the same minerals because they've been added value to at a higher price, and maybe we sold them. I love how the thought of what we can do moving forward should be able to help us in terms of handling whatever resources we have. So the first one, I think a recommendation is to on and control whatever we are doing. So like 70% of our mines and whatever mineral extraction we are doing is not owned by Africans, it's owned by foreigners and whatnot. So there is need to have ownership if we are then to really develop, and then there is need to put an element of value addition to whatever minerals we're producing, and then there is need to have skills development and leadership, and by so doing we should be able to have a continent that's going to be able to thrive. Neo-colonialism in chapter 12 is another aspect of discussion that we have. So Africa's dependence on foreign aid is something that's crippling us. A study shows that the ratio is 3-to-1 of the help that we get from our wherever we get our help from, and then whatever they are getting from us. So imagine they give us the grants, and then they give us the debts that we collect and all that, but repayment of that has got a lot to it. So we might get like $1 trillion in whatever aid, and then paying back, you realize that we're just paying back about $3 trillion or something like that. So the future of Africa lies in trade. If we're to engage in trade between African countries, I think the tax thing, I think on trade between African countries is something that should be removed, my opinion as well, if we are to be able to develop. Basically, that was part 1 and part 2. In part 3, the path to progress has to do with what chapter 10 is talking about. So planning for the future. I love how JF Kennedy's was able to sell his dream of putting a man on the moon, when Neil Armstrong by 1969 was able to go to the moon. Like after 9 years of him selling off the vision to the people that this is what we want to do and all that. So in a similar vein, if we could have a future mindset that is focused on optimal strategy for growth for both individuals and countries, I think we should be able to develop. In chapter 11, he's discussing morals and culture. So cultural values and ethics are considerably something that are helping us as a nation or as a world in order to thrive. So then economic values, so these are economic values of Africans, I think from afar back, were dependent on work and collaboration. So teamwork was something that was there. But then a transition or a tragedy that's happened is the fact that there is a lot of competition and the pull him or pull her down syndrome that we have. But if we're to develop as a continent, there is need for us to embrace collaborations. Let's learn from the Asian community. Indians and generational wealth, for example, there is that aspect of them helping each other, and then they're able to thrive. Most of their generational wealth is backed up in gold and in real estate, and Africa can do that. Chapter 12 is my favorite chapter of the book, where we are promising less and then delivering more. We need to develop a reputation of being dependent on, of being truthful, and then of being consistent. If we could have these qualities as a continent, we should be able to thrive and develop, because a global village we're living in right now, and then every business being online and all that, if people cannot rely on you, if people cannot depend on your consistency, and if people cannot tell that you're truthful, then you're not going to thrive. But if the opposite is the case, then well and good, there is going to be progress. Quality and excellence is what is being discussed in chapter 13. So quality management means consistently pursuing excellence, and then to be excellent, you need to be so good that you cannot be ignored. Excellence then becomes not just a goal, but it's a necessity. And then in chapter 14 is discussing clarion. That's a call to the next generation of leaders. The youth as leaders is going to be something that could help transform Africa as a whole. And there's hope that the youth are going to definitely go into positions where they're going to be able to influence. Our forefathers, to get our independence from our colonial masters, they were the youth. And the agenda was pushed up until they got the independence that we are enjoying right now. And if we are to thrive, then definitely we need to have an aspect of youth involvement in leadership. However, a tragedy is, according to Herbert Hoover, who says older men declare war, but then the youth are the ones who are fighting and dying, which is sad, and it is explained more in the book in context. And you see it mostly in African countries, where when it's time for elections, the youth are the ones who are put to be in positions of cadres and all that, and then the big guys, the older ones, are the ones who are benefiting really so much from that. But yeah, that's just a tragedy that we could look into. Lastly, in the epilogue, there is an interesting question that is posed, where why does a continent that's full of resources, mineral resources, the abundance of everything that we have, yet we still do not have widespread prosperity? Why is it so? And then the responses are simple. One of them is our historical legacy and colonialism and all that. Yes, that was there, it happened and all that, but then I think there is need to really look into the future and see how we could progress from that. A second reason is our governance, corruption, and all these other things that are hindering our progress if we're to move. And lastly, Africa must confront the complexities of global economic dynamics and trade relations. It is time that Africa thought. Africa must think, and Africa must act. This was Africa Must Think by Dumisani Lingamangali Ngube. Till we meet in the next segment, I am checking out.